what is it? Well, it's a black man outside a club. There are two officers who say he had drugs and then he ran and they got into a fight and they had to subdue him. It's going to be, the word of a black man against two police officers, duty bound and sworn by oath to uphold the law. And, there are a lot of old school judges out there who would just look at it and say, this guy's guilty.
I was at this really incredible point in my life where I was being challenged. I was challenged in terms of what we were experiencing as a family. I was challenged in terms of what I was experiencing personally. I was married, baby on the way, 1-year-old son. I was facing charges. I was beaten and spirit almost broken and in need of help. And we were in a process where we're searching for someone that might bring some help and bring some hope. Welcome to this edition of It's Complicated. My name is Orlando Bowen, and I'm here with a gentleman who came into our lives at a very critical time. This gentleman brings incredible knowledge, expertise, and a belief in people that allowed us to rise above some of the challenges that we faced. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I'm joined by the one and only David Humphrey. He's a criminal attorney, criminal defense attorney extraordinaire. He comes from a line of excellence in that vein, and his son is following closely in his footsteps. David, welcome.
Thank you very much, Orlando.
Yeah.
You're already presenting as a better advocate than I could ever be.
That's too kind. So as you're aware, and we're looping you guys into this conversation. It was some extraordinary times that we were experiencing as a family. I had just been beaten. I'd been set up and was facing criminal charges. I went to seek legal representation, and the first set of lawyers I went to, I poured my heart out in terms of talking to them about what we had experienced and what had happened, and that was really difficult to do. And then I took a deep breath to hear what they had to say. And their response to me was, based on our professional experience, and we don't want this to sound the wrong way, but given that you present as a black man, the odds are kind of stacked against you. And we're going to suggest that you plead guilty to a lesser charge. I was flabbergasted by that statement, right? And I thought, I need to understand, right? Why would a criminal defense attorney make such a recommendation? Could you give any insight?
I'm flabbergasted too.
Yeah.
I don't understand that. I mean, the reason people become defense lawyers is because they want to be there to help people who are facing criminal investigation or criminal charges. That's the reason why we do it. Getting paid is nice, but the real satisfaction is taking on people's problems and helping people get through their problems. Mm-hmm. And if someone comes into a real criminal lawyer's office and says, I'm charged and I'm telling you I'm innocent, will you take my case? It shouldn't be a hard conversation. You take the case. And if someone says they're innocent, you embrace their innocence. Their presumed innocence is a matter of law, or innocent is a matter of law, but if they come in and say they are factually innocent and they want you to defend their case, then it's an easy call to take it and to start marshaling the very best defense you can for them. Mm-hmm. If disclosure comes and that person looks demonstrably guilty, you might have a hard conversation with them. Mm-hmm. You might say, I've heard you, but it looks like this case is overwhelming. And do you want to reconsider your plea? If you insist, and this is what criminal lawyers have to do, say to the client, if you insist to me that you are factually innocent, it doesn't matter how strong the case looks. If you tell me you are factually innocent and you want to defend the case, we will defend the case, because I cannot ethically go into court and plead someone guilty if they tell me they are in fact not guilty. Mm-hmm. And that was you. And that's why it was such a privilege to take you on as a client. You were asserting your factual innocence. You were factually innocent. and you were happy to find someone who was to be prepared to go through that process with you.
Absolutely. And I think, I don't know, have you ever been in a room and you're having a conversation with someone, and while you're having the conversation, it's like they're looking over your head, or they're not fully present in that conversation. That's how it felt for me when, at our first couple stops as we were seeking legal representation. And I didn't know if the glossing of their eyes was because they just had other things on their mind, or that they didn't see me. But I didn't feel as though they saw me as a human being in that moment that was pleading with them to hear what I was saying. And I was challenged by that, because, for me, it's, and they're like, yeah, it just seemed too frivolous, it was too easy for them to, without even further conversation, just say, yeah, based on our experience, we think, you just met me, you just heard the story, like, how are we jumping to that? So is there any possible explanation why someone would say that? And even the fact that they said, well, we don't want you to take this the wrong way, but given that you're a black male, and I'm thinking, well, I almost wanted to say, I need you to break that down for me more. I know I am, but what does that have to do with anything?
So can I explain that? I find that hard to explain. Yeah. Particularly given that it was you having the conversation with them.
Right.
Okay, I remember how I came to be your lawyer. You remember you started with my partner, Brian Greenspan,
yeah.
right? And Brian told me he'd met with you. You told him what happened.
Yeah.
And he said 5 minutes into the conversation with you, he knew that you were innocent, and he was enthusiastically taking on your case. And then the case came to me. And I've told you this. It took me 10 minutes with you to be satisfied that you were factually innocent,
yeah.
right? And you project not only what everybody sees every day, your positivity and your energy and your love, yeah. But you projected innocence. Yeah. And it just so happened that the evidence ultimately vindicated your complete innocence. Right. So I got to tell you, even going back to our first interaction, yeah. I couldn't understand how someone hearing you out, yeah. right, would suggest that you should just fold your hand right. and try and make some kind of a deal. The only thing I can think of is those lawyers you first had conversation with, they've been jaded by the system, and right. they've seen the unfortunate reality in the system, right? It's maybe a little better now, 15 years from when you went into the criminal justice system, yeah. But, could I see some lawyers looking at your case as a mathematical problem? What is it? Well, it's a black man outside a club. There are two officers who say he had drugs and then he ran, and they got into a fight, and they had to subdue him. It's going to be, the word of a black man against two police officers, yeah. duty-bound and sworn by oath to uphold the law. Right. And, there are a lot of old-school judges out there who would just look at it and say, this guy's guilty. Right. I'm not going to disbelieve the officers. Right. And so maybe, it's no excuse for the way they dealt with you in their first interactions, but maybe they were just jaded by that reality of the system.
Right. So perhaps that is what it was, because I felt like they weren't fully present as I was sharing, and maybe it's because they were doing the math. Maybe that's what they were processing and saying, so it's my word against the word of two officers, sworn in to serve and to protect, who are going to say this on their oath, right? So have we made headway over the last 15 years? Are things different? Do you have a sense of that?
Ooh, that's complicated. I think we have, and I think we make inroads with every case in which it is demonstrated yeah. to the court and to the public that the police have misconducted themselves, right. or that someone who is asserting their innocence is in fact factually innocent. Thank God for DNA in many cases. Thank God for all the video we have.
Right.
The George Floyd situations of the world. That would have been 20 years ago. That would have been brushed off as, well, listen, the officers who were there, they say they only used necessary force.
Right.
And the only people who suggest that excessive force was used are people who are allied with the deceased, and the deceased isn't around to tell his story.
Right.
So, allegations of excessive use of force by the police, particularly in situations with racialized victims, they generally resulted in no accountability for the police.
Right.
But, we know that now with video and other forms of reliable evidence, the truth comes out.
Yeah.
And although the police, we've got to give them their due, they generally do a good job and abide by the law and their duties. But there are many who don't.
Right.
And I think, fortunately, that's being recognized by the public. And more, it's recognized in court.
Mm-hmm.
And your case was an example of that. We didn't, the good news is, we didn't need independent corroborative evidence in your case. It would have been nice if there was security video that showed what really happened.
Yes.
We, to some extent, got lucky in an old-fashioned way.
Right.
These two guys couldn't keep their story straight.
Yeah.
And all the inconsistencies between each other and even from one telling of the story by them to the next, they just they couldn't keep it straight.
Yeah.
And that's what satisfied the judge, that they weren't telling the truth at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you're I know you're very modest in your articulation of how that came to be, that their stories were really exposed, but under cross-examination, it really came to light that the inconsistencies and the discrepancies were so large and so significant that it just, to me, it didn't make any sense for us to even be in that space and to be going through the whole trial and that, going through something like that. For us, there was the pain of the moment of the act itself, the assault. But then the malicious prosecution seemed to have almost an amplifying effect because it started to feel like it was much bigger than we initially thought, right? So now when we're trying to, now we're at least in a place where we're having open and honest conversations about race and what it's like being black in North America. I feel like we can start to make some more headway or some more inroads in moving towards like justice, like real justice for everyone. But what else can be done? Like, what else can be done to help be catalysts in that process? So even though I feel like there's been progress, and some of it comes in the form of indisputable evidence. Right. But I feel like there's a mindset as well that also needs to be shifted. And so I don't know. I'm leaning on your wisdom once again around that. What else can be done?
Well, it's such an important question, and I wish I had a more insightful answer. Because, what I do is I take on clients, I take on people like you, right? And on an individual basis, I take on their defense and I try and advance the best defense I can.
God bless you for that.
Well, but the shortcoming in all that is maybe I haven't taken enough time to sit back and say, okay, it's not just about fighting the one fight. It's about taking on the bigger battle. And so what's the solution? Well, in part it is one fight at a time. Every time you can out, right, an abuse of power, every time you can out an act of racism on the part of someone in authority, you're fighting the fight, and you're getting us to a place where it'll be easier to prove in the future. There's more acceptance for the concept, and recognition how insidious it is in the criminal justice system. Other ways that we improve the system, they're beyond my control, but I look at some of them and applaud some of them. Diversity on the bench, right? The bench looks, in my lifetime, the bench looks different now than it did when I started. Okay. It was white men. Right. And we've made great strides in changing the way the bench looks. Judges are now, almost 50-50, depending on the bench, almost 50-50 women to men. Yeah. There is good, although insufficient and imperfect representation of minority communities. Yeah. We need more black judges. Yeah. We need more black lawyers. Yeah. But we're making strides.
Awesome. Good. And it's like, it's one step at a time, right? So, I had never been so close to considering a shift in career as I was after, going through our case and thinking about something that you brought to our family, hope. In a time where, we have family members that have come up through the civil rights era who had seen so many things, who pulled me aside and said, listen, young man, you don't understand what's about to happen here. I've seen this before. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go to court, you're going to be convicted, and then upon conviction, you're going to go to prison, you won't be able to see your family again, and that was their truth. That's what they were holding on to. And, I kept saying there has to be a bigger purpose. But in the midst of all that, you saw us. You saw the humanity in us. And there was a connection there that I think led to your conviction around, we're going to do this. We're going to take this case. And, I'll never forget. I'll always fondly remember that day. Forever immortalized on my desk.
Oh, the day of the acquittal.
The day of the acquittal. The day of the acquittal. So powerful, so freeing, and at the same time, painful in terms of why did we have to go through all of this? Right?
Your journey is such an unusual one. Someone being charged and being taken to court, wrongfully accused. Sadly, that's not by itself so unusual. But part of what was unusual was, I'm gonna say this: you're the perfect client. You are so positive. You are surrounded by some of the most positive, lovable people I think I've ever seen. I can't remember going to court with a client I was so proud to stand beside, but who had an entourage of some of the most impressive people I've ever seen. It was energizing. Yeah. And then, we started the trial. Yeah. We heard the first officer. We got halfway through the second officer. We ran out of time and the case had to be adjourned. And I recall talking to you and saying, this is ridiculous. This is just a case that should not be prosecuted any further. We talked about it, and I uncharacteristically wrote a letter to the Crown in the middle of the trial and said, you have no chance of getting a conviction, and it's wrong to continue with this prosecution. And then they decided to prosecute anyway. So there was one twist that was disappointing for me as a lawyer in the system. I thought that the Crown would act more responsibly and honorably. And then, of course, we go through the balance of the trial. I maintained that there was absolutely no way they could get a conviction. They invited the judge to convict. And then the case is under reserve, and then the whole Sheldon Cook thing happens. Right. And the officer, or one of the officers we said was dirty and would lie and would have access to drugs and would plant them on you to try and cover up their assault of you. Lo and behold, he gets charged with possession of 15 kilograms of cocaine. Right. And it was like we hit the mother lode. right? And then, even then, you recall, we applied for disclosure. Crown wouldn't give us the disclosure of Sheldon Cook. We said, we want it, we want to reopen. And that's when it was, well, you know what? Just out of an abundance of caution, we're going to withdraw the charge. What do you mean abundance of caution? You're going to withdraw the charge. And I'll never forget speaking to you about that.
Yeah.
And you said, can they do that? Can they do that? Because I want this judge to tell me I'm innocent.
Yeah.
I don't want some Crown attorney withdrawing the charge
Yeah.
and saying, oh, it's just out of an abundance of caution.
Right.
And I'll never forget when we appeared in front of the judge and explained the whole situation to him and said, this man, he doesn't want the charge. He wants your judgment because you've heard the evidence.
Yeah.
You know, we've got no guarantee, but we're pretty confident you're going to find him innocent, as you should.
Yeah.
And although we weren't scheduled for judgment that day, the judge took a break and came right back and said, Crown can't withdraw this charge, and you shouldn't have to wait for your judgment. I'll give it to you right now. So, you know, your journey through the system, it's the only journey you've had. But I've seen many people go through the system, and I can't think of a client who's gone through so many challenging twists and turns. But, you know, from the lawyer's perspective, I love hearing about your personal experience of the thing, but for the from the lawyer's perspective, at the end, you know, the system worked, and you got the absolute vindication you were entitled to.
So I think about the, you know, the young people, like the groups that we were working with at the time. Newcomer youth, refugee families, youth living in challenging socioeconomic spaces, communities. And I kept thinking, well, what if this was one of them? What chance would they have? What if they didn't have equity in a house, or they didn't have somewhere they could get resources, or they didn't have people to support them, like you talked about our entourage, like, you know, they weren't able to, or comfortable or confident to speak up for themselves. What if? And I felt like what was happening with us in terms of our journey was much bigger than us. What was happening with us was we had to get through it in order to be able to give hope to those who said, if this can happen to him, I might as well fold up my tent right now. So for us, there was always a bigger picture in terms of what was happening, right? But I believe that it starts with, you know, folks being open, like you being open, your team being open to not just taking on the case, but the spirit with which you took on the case, the spirit with which you showed up, the spirit with which we had communications. All of those, to me, said, I see you. There's something that we talk about, the spirit of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a Swahili word that means I am because you are, right? So I'm connected to the humanity in you. And I felt that. I always have. And that's why our picture is immortalized on the desk, right? Because it's deeper than just a transactional, I will take your case, right? It's deeper than just, yeah, I think we have a chance, right? There's just something different, and that's what we want to engender in folks, to see that humanity in whoever it is, right? To act when they can, right? And to stand up for the right thing, because it's always the right time to do that. So I want to come back and close with this. When you showed up, you brought something that is probably the most important thing you could give to another human being: hope. We've looked into the eyes of young people who have lost hope. We've been in maximum security prisons where folks are like, I'm done, it doesn't matter what I do from here and henceforth. But to show up in a way that embodies hope, to look at somebody and say, I've got you, and then turn to do your job with such conviction that I've seen the humanity, I've seen all that I need to see, now let me do my part. That is the galvanizing way of showing up that can move the needle on what's possible. And yes, you know, we've made some progress, but we've got a ways to go. I commend you for your example. I commend you for the excellence with which you do your work. Most importantly, I commend you for consistently showing up in ways that bring hope and positivity and perspective, like you did for our family and for me personally. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you. I miss you. I miss your positivity. And can you make a career change? I love nothing more than being an advocate for someone who's up against the wall.
Yeah.
You should do it. You'd be perfect.
Well, I think I've been put on the spot. We may have to take this convo offline. Thank you so much, David, for being here. Until next time, listen, the most important thing you could give to somebody else is hope. And hope not just in terms of the words that you speak, but the way that you show up. So make a decision, regardless of what you're faced with, regardless of the challenges that are being experienced personally or collectively, you can make a decision to show up in ways that bring hope, perspective, and possibility. It may not be easy, it may be complicated, but it's necessary. Until next time.